Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salaamedia this evening, and you are coming to us live on the various platforms, Salaamedia this evening, and also on Facebook and on the YouTube. Now the time is just gone 7 minutes past 9 p.m. and this is Wednesday nights with Inayat Wadi, where we host panel discussions covering areas of interest. And one of the biggest issues at this point in time, obviously, is the pandemic, which is creating havoc. We've heard about Gauteng being the epicenter. But the key issue here is in these unprecedented times that we are living in, the key issue is what is this doing to society? How is this impacting on the fabric of society, on communities, and also looking at the psychological impact of COVID-19 that is creating havoc. We know many people are sick. There are many who are in hospital, those on ventilators, those on oxygen, and many people have passed on as well. And it is clear that this is creating paranoia, and at the same time, people are being consumed as far as this pandemic is concerned. And this ultimately affects mental health. It affects psychology. It affects people psychologically. And this is something that we need to talk about, because we're talking about communities, we're talking about societies, we're talking about families, and how this impacts on families, on parents, on grandparents, on children, and just people at large. And we have assembled quite an interesting panel this evening. We've got Dr. Seth Cooper, who is a clinical psychologist. We've got Idris Khamisa, a personal development consultant, and we also got Ruby Patel, who is a lecturer and a clinical psychologist. Later on in the program, we'll be joined by Mariam Mia of Salaamedia, and she's basically on the ground. She deals with children, and just to look at it from a children's perspective, but I do see the panelists are online already. I see Dr. Seth Cooper is around, Ruby Patel, and also Idris Khamisa. Dr. Cooper, I see you top on the screen. Welcome to the show, and wonderful that you're able to join us on this panel discussion.
Yes, although we, as you say, in terrible times, and these require us to provide compassion and consideration for everybody, not only those close to us, but people in other spaces, because all of us are in the same boat, and we should, for once, the entire world confront similar issues, and we should consider that we are not the only ones affected by this, and therefore the way we treat others indicates how we ought to be treated ourselves.
Thank you for that, Ruby Patel. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the show as well.
Walaikum salam, and good evening to everyone. Indeed, Inayat, we are living through some very unprecedented and extremely horribly difficult times. And like Dr. Cooper says, it's a time for deep compassion, deep understanding, and an awareness of what's happening around us.
Yes, and also Idris Khamisa. Idris Bhai, assalamu alaikum, welcome.
Walaikum salam, and good evening to all of you. Pardon me, by nature, I'm a person that smiles, because I think in these times, there's so much of sad news around. I think it's important for us, as it has been said, to be self-aware, to give people hope, to give them direction, and what is needed is leadership in our homes and in society.
Yes, now obviously we're going to be tackling a number of issues, and I want to begin with you, Dr. Seth Cooper. And, we all acknowledge the fact that these are unprecedented times. And the one area that we don't seem to focus a lot on is the psychological aspect, the trauma that is associated with what we are going through. And this trauma is not short-term, it is long-term trauma, because it's well over a year since we have been exposed, and the world has been exposed to the pandemic. And initially, when this pandemic had started, obviously everybody was highly concerned. But as time goes, and we go through first wave, we go through the second wave, we go through the third wave, and it actually becomes a lot more traumatic. And the key area of focus tonight, obviously, is to look at the psychological trauma and how do we actually look at the psychological impact of what we are experiencing right now.
Look, I think we need to acknowledge that the pandemic has affected everybody, that outside of the economic devastation that the overwhelming majority of people the world over face, we are impacted by psychological issues. We are impacted, like your flyer says, with certain kinds of reactions to it. And we need to acknowledge that how we deal with this ourselves, and I'm speaking particularly of adults now, how we treat ourselves, how we engage with those in our immediate and larger circles is going to help us through this pandemic. We are not islands alone. We are indeed connected through a variety of different social, religious, spiritual, human elements. We human beings, and therefore we connected with each other. And what has emerged, I can give you very, very quickly, what has emerged from the literature, from the studies done, is that panic behavior, pervasive feelings of hopelessness. Besides the financial insecurity, there's fear of infection, and then cogitation, just thinking, overthinking, feelings of fear, anger, sadness, worry, numbness, and frustration. Then we also recognize that there are changes in appetite, energy, desires, and our interests, the usual interests, difficulty concentrating and dealing with issues. Now, in the symptoms I've just given out, I think nearly every one of us can identify with a clutch of at least a few of those. If we're not, then it indicates that we're denying or we are numb to what we are confronting. And these challenges are primarily stressful, anxiety causing, and can cause very strong emotions in everyone, both adults and children. And we need to be looking out for the most vulnerable amongst us, our children, our young people. And we need to display more care. And also, I'm sure that my fellow panelists will come on as well to say how we learn to cope with the stress in a healthy way will make all of us and the people we care about, those around us, become more resilient and prepared to face not only the next day, but going forward into the future. So I'm just going to pause there so that, you know, some of the things you may want to interrogate, my panelists may want to comment on it, but definitely we're seeing that the majority of people in the world are psychologically impacted by over 15 months now of pandemic, of not only the pandemic, but a pandemic of tweets, of all sorts of social media, false information, instant cures, etc., etc. And people out there get very confused, and there's a fatigue, not only physically, but also mentally, in how we're dealing with this. So the natural desire is to just want to close down, and that's when more problems are going to creep in, if I may put it that way. Thanks, Inna.
Yes, Ruby, just to bring you into the discussion, and interesting, Dr. Cooper speaks about fatigue and mental fatigue. And this is obviously as a result of the mentally, people have basically retreated, I would say, into a negative mindset. And when one looks at the chain of events and how things have developed or evolved over a period of time, for example, when one looks at the lockdowns that started off initially, when one looks at the restrictions that were placed during this lockdowns, now that alone has obviously exhausted people in terms of precautions, in terms of adhering to protocols. And over and above that, we've seen a lot happen. We've seen people falling sick. We've seen family members. We've seen friends passing, and somebody made the comment, people are dying like flies. Now, when we see all of this around, what does this actually do to the psyche? What does this do to the mindset of people generally as we go through this pandemic?
Inayat, I was just speaking to someone just a little before I came on now, and he was describing to me the violence that he's feeling at the moment, and he described what he's experiencing as a violence, and a violence to the psyche. And what we're talking about here, Inayat, is a description of someone who's stuck between you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Closing a business, for example, because of protecting aging parents at home. Having lost a family member last week Thursday. It's like, there is no out. There is nothing that gives one hope when you're stuck between this. There is a serious economic situation here. There's a situation of a family, or feeding the family and not having an income, and struggling with that violence, and simultaneously knowing that there are vulnerable people and already members that have been lost. So the death, the grief, the enormous amount of grief that people are carrying at the moment is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And where we were finding a languishing almost, after the first wave and the second wave, where there was this in-between state of not quite feeling the joy of life anymore, but also not quite feeling the depression and the anxiety. Now we're finding that is moving more and more into a space where people are struggling with trauma, with depression, with anxiety. And certainly the children that we're seeing are struggling enormously as well with mental health issues, especially with this third wave that we're seeing now. It's almost like the hope that people were holding on to is dissipating. And now the violence of this third wave is entering everyone's lives.
Yes, certainly. And also, I think if, I'd like to obviously bring Idris Kamisa into the discussion. Now, Idris, obviously, I know you have interaction with many people, thousands of people you've interacted over a period of time. And clearly, you've had enough time to sit back, to assess, to analyze the situation. And I know for someone like yourself, being a motivational speaker as well, you've inspired many people, you've inspired thousands of people over the years. At a time like this, when people are faced with this situation, when we speak of mental distress and the like, how does one react?
As Dr. Cooper mentioned, and as Ruby also mentioned now, these are very unprecedented times. The real question is this: what do you tell someone that has lost his father and mother on 2 consecutive days? What do you tell someone who has been a shopkeeper who has to close his shop? What do you tell? What do you tell a young boy, a young girl who will not see his parents ever again? And so we are living in these very, very challenging times. And the whole thing is this, that, painful though it is, this landscape has changed. Gone are the days, for example, you could have long-term planning. Your new wealth is your health. It's about maintaining your sanity. It's about being resilient. And how do you go about doing this? And I think it's very, very important, because in terms of some of the things that I do, I always like to believe that a great home is like a sanctuary. It's not a site of contestation and struggle. I anticipated when they had the lockdown the first time, I said perhaps be an opportunity for couples to reconnect with each other, to start having the conversation. They're going to spend more time at home. But sadly, the divorce rates have increased, and we find the home has become a site of contestation and struggle. And so there are so many things that so many variables that you got to deal with today. And I think it's important, very, very important for us to understand that this is not going to be forever. And in the interim, lots of things are going to happen. Our life would have changed radically. So how do you survive? How do you even live today? So, I'm hopeful. In fact, many people, often what I do, every now and then, I would send a 2 or 3 minute video clip, just giving people hope and asking them, suddenly, our mortality is staring us on the face. It's become so palpable. It's become so real. So I said it's an opportune time for you to reassess your relationship with your loved ones, to reconnect with them, so that when they do die, the loss is going to be irretrievable. I have no doubt about it. But, in terms that you do not have any regrets. So there's so many things happening in so many places. So, and what makes it even worse, that you are bludgeoned by the media. There's so many conflicting opinions. There are doctors who will tell you, please do not take the vaccine. The others say, please, you need to take it, and so on and so forth. So there's so much of confusion. Even the medical scientists themselves, I don't think they have a coherent response to it as yet. And so I think, it's important for us to maintain our sanity, to have cool heads, and so that we are able, first, in terms of an individual, that you must try as far as possible to maintain your optimism. And as far as the family is concerned, as a cohesive unit, it's so important, because young children, children themselves, look to adults as a source of inspiration.
Yes, shukran for that, Idris. And Dr. Cooper, I think just following up from what Idris is saying, and I think he makes some very, very telling points. One of them, obviously, being bombarded by the media. And it's not only the mainstream media, we've been bombarded all around, and especially with the advent of social media. Now, there is just so much information, and you mentioned that there's fake information, there's false information, but also at the same time, there are many, many conflicting messages that are going out. Now, obviously, all of this creates paranoia, it creates fear, and it's a fear of the unknown that is creating this negative sentiment or negative vibes that we're talking about.
Yes. Look, I think that the important factor here is that anybody who hides behind social media to spread panic is themselves a terribly insecure and uncertain person, however much they may claim to have these brackets behind their names, because nobody in a time of such global, immense proportions can afford to throw their own fears and uncertainties into other people. I would welcome those people who claim they have all these successes to actually put it out to their peers so that their peers can learn from them. But they don't do that. What they do is they just throw it out on WhatsApps, on other media platforms, so that whoever they connect with gets influenced by that. And remember that in our society, Well, in societies, almost the world over, people pay particular homage and respect to those who have some expertise. So we respect religious figures, we respect elders, and we respect certain professionals. So I am afraid that the science that we have right now is, of course, experimental, but it's very clear that if we don't do some basic things, this virus will find a host in each of us. And in fact, I think right now that a significant percentage of populations in different parts of the world have it. Ours is a very young population. Our median age is in the late 20s. So young people are more robust. They'll carry this. Remember, this important second wave emerged in December. And who sparked it off? These matriculants who went on a rage to Durban, thousands of them, and they went back home. And like Idris is saying, they went back and in turn infected other people. Old people usually are not out there in the streets. They're at home. And in the kinds of communal settings that this station addresses, people cherish their elders, they have extended families, they worship in a communal setting together. Now, the pandemic requires us to rethink some of these things, you see. And I know of families where the kid matriculated, was happy, went to this rage, went back home, father got infected, the mother got a few days, both of them died. This is not one case, more than one. Now, our authorities, instead of going to those people who were responsible for hosting such an event in violation of the emergency disaster regulations, have left them. You see, in just the same way that some political groups who have marched have not been dealt with, and I'm pleased that the police is looking at that march on Friday. So we need to understand that this is a virus. It transforms, it changes as it moves along. And today it will be the beta variant, tomorrow it will be it is the Delta variant, and it'll be another variant. As long as we don't protect ourselves, we are going to have complete vulnerability. And the only way we can protect ourselves, distancing, masking over the nose and mouth, and ensuring if we have to do anything together, it's in our little bubble where all of us take the same precautions. Allah will not look down upon us if we obey the prescripts to keep other people alive. It cannot be that we should be just doing things as if it is not a pandemic we confronted. And I must add here that in close-knit groups, like we find among Muslims, the incidence of COVID infections and deaths is disproportionately high. In this country, that is emerging, and surely we now need to look at that and say, how do we overcome this? Because we can't afford the numbers of professional people, the numbers of our senior elders with knowledge that we transmit from generation to generation to just disappear. And we have this loss, serial loss and grieving that is occasioned by our own inability to understand the basic science of viral transmission. So that, I think, is the underpinning to how we should look at it. And I don't know any responsible leader in whatever sector who will push people to get harmed and or to be the cause of somebody else's killing, especially their loved ones. And that's how serious this is, colleagues.
Yes, thank you for that, Dr. Cooper. And Ruby, just to bring you into the discussion. Now, obviously, from what Dr. Cooper is talking, and he's talking about responsibility, introspecting and taking responsibility for ourselves. But what is also critical is we are, in fact, exposed to external factors, but we also, at the same time, we're at the mercy of our authorities, our government. And when we're talking about the state of paranoia, when we're talking about the mental wellness of the population of the nation, just how much would the government have contributed to the mental state that we find ourselves in? Because we've seen since the pandemic has started how it has been managed, how it has been mismanaged as well, to the point that we've heard so much about corruption, we've heard about the PPE, we've heard about so much over a period of time. And then you have all sorts of commitments that are made that are not met. Things like the virus rollout and herd immunity, and all of that has become somewhat of a moving target. Now, when one puts all these factors into perspective, obviously this obviously does create concern, it creates worry, it creates the paranoia that we're talking about. Ruby, if you could just unmute your button, please.
My button is unmuted.
Okay, perfect. I can hear you now.
Inayat, a very, very crucial point that you're bringing up, and one that we have to engage with very, very seriously when we're looking at this pandemic and what's happening in communities. The government's response has been very disappointing, I suppose one could say. Like you say, the corruption, but also something I want to pick up on is the response to the pandemic has been, and some of what Dr. Cooper has also said, has been very largely constructed as an individual response. That we have to take responsibility, we have to do things around us, we have to bubble up. But I think what we forget is that even though we might bubble up, even though we might take responsibility, there are millions and millions of South Africans that has to go out, that has to work, that has to earn a living, that have to get onto taxis, that have to go and do the jobs that they need to feed the families. And when we think about an individual response, I think something that we need to think very critically about is, and we're forgetting, is a community response, and how are we going to actually think about community responses in the wake of and in the face of the vaccines not being rolled out quick enough, money that's going down a dark hole with the corruption. We have to find solutions that are going to be more empowering, and it's going to be more empowering for communities on the whole. And if we're going to address the paranoia and the fear, that perhaps we need to interrogate that the answers don't solely lie in individual responsibilities, but that we think a little bit more creatively in terms of how we engage communities and how we bring in communities and have community conversations around empowering people in how we're going to manage this pandemic. Because we can't rely on getting vaccines on time, for example. So there's something that we need to do, and I think we're not looking at creatively enough, is how do we engage community activism, how do we engage community engagement, and how do we empower communities on the whole.
Yes, I think also it is when we're talking about engaging communities. Now, sorry about that. What we've also seen is when the pandemic had originally surfaced, and we've seen communities rallying together. And this was a time when we've seen so much happen. Like, for instance, we've seen millions of rands going to impoverished communities. We've seen feeding schemes. Now, all of that at the end of the day requires resources. And we've got to a stage now, I think, where a lot of these resources have been exhausted. That is the first thing. And as we are getting, into this pandemic and getting into now the third wave and possibly the fourth wave, we've seen the latest lockdown. Obviously, there are restrictions, but also over a period of time, there are millions of people that are sitting without an income. They're sitting without a job. And when one looks at just the family structure, for instance, what is the role of the head of the family to put food on the table, to provide a roof over the head of his family, to care for the well-being of his children? But sometimes, or in many cases, we've seen that head is cut off as well. Either he's passed on or somebody in the family has passed on. Now, putting all of this together, obviously puts us in a situation where people don't know where to turn to, who to turn to. But as Ruby mentions, community, we need to evaluate where we are as communities and what sort of support structures we can actually set up for ourselves within communities.
Yeah, you see, one of the things that I was concerned about is that because of what is happening around us, is a kind of a radical change of landscape, where you cannot think beyond a week or a day or 2 weeks. And what has happened as a result of that, you find that individuals are anxious, they've got doubts that not what the future holds for them. And I want to just refer to three particular points. The one is, you spoke about the head of the household. And the head of the household, what he does, when he loses his job, he or her job, it's almost stripping them of the woman or manhood, as it were. It erodes the self-esteem. And when they come home, you find that sometimes, in some cases, family members may not show compassion, may not show an understanding. And he lives in his own particular world, and he's so preoccupied with those challenges. And as a result, he does not engage all of them. For example, today I just went to one particular business company, and I asked them, I said to them, do you think if I were to do a wellness program in this company, would it help? He says, hey, I think it's a brilliant idea. It's a great idea. And then she said to me, she knows of someone who's does the job of a waiter. And he said, that if the lockdown continues, it goes beyond 2 weeks, my wife has told me that she's going to leave me. And these are some of the situations that people find themselves. But it's important, as you said, that the communities must come around. And you know what happens? We should not complain about a donor fatigue. I mean, there are people that may be in a better position to help their brothers. We are part of this humanity. I always cite this particular few words. I quote these few words, and I say, man has learned to fly like a bird in the sky, swim like a fish in the sea, but he cannot walk like a human being on this earth. And you find that because what has happened, because of the pandemic, there is a sense of detachment. You're feeling so isolated. You are living in your own world. The dialogue is an inner dialogue, and as a result, that is becoming very, very problematic. So I think, every person of any kind of authority, we need to look at the human element besides the food and water and so on, which is a rudimentary need. It's about, how do you give people hope? How can we galvanize and support each other? And it's very, very sad. And when you spoke earlier on, that the corruption and the kind of things that are going on, it's a very, very sad indictment on our community. The second thing that I want to mention very, very quickly is this, that, I'm reminded of a particular example of a particular company where the bookkeeper, the auditor came to them and he said to them, you know what, you've got 1,000 people working for you, and because of the crisis, I think you've got to say goodbye to 500 of them. So he said, no, he said, these are people that have supported me in the good times, and I'm not prepared to do that. So you've got to think of a very creative way. You've got to find an answer. You've got to find an answer, because I want to make sure each one of these individuals remains in my company. So anyway, they applied their minds, because what is needed is creativity now. They applied the mind and they said, okay, fine. So what he did, he offered to his staff, he said, listen, we do not want 50% of you to leave this company. So we have a plan. We are going to recommend that you can take 1 or 2 months leave, but without salary. And all of them agreed. And as a result, they found that in this period, the company was more productive, because they realized they have a responsibility not only to themselves, but to other people. So I think this whole issue of generosity must come into play. It's not about, adopting the attitude of being self-absorbed. It's about me, myself, I. The third important aspect, and I know people that are watching it and listening to it, as psychologists would say, revealing is healing. You've got to speak. And as a result, what is happening, if you do not speak, speaking itself and you're talking about a situation can be very, very cathartic. Otherwise, you are living in it. It's part of a vicious cycle. And once you do that, you find a sense of relief. And I think what's important is this: there needs to be empathy, there needs to be understanding, there needs to be compassion. And it's important that you cannot go through this whole episode alone. You need everybody, your family, your neighbors, the community, and everyone together, so that we have a commonality of vision and we'll get there.
Yes, and also, Dr. Cooper, when one looks at some of the other countries, and obviously we know it's difficult for us to make comparisons with countries around the world. For instance, when one looks at New Zealand and Australia and comparing how they've basically managed this pandemic, where we've heard where the year of a single case in an entire city is basically shut down for a period of time. Now, obviously, South Africa, a very, very different country and a different scenario in South Africa, considering we are in Africa. But also at the same time, Dr. Cooper, looking at, this is the question that I raised with Ruby in terms of the government and the responsibility on the part of the government. And what we see is when a government is not decisive enough, this creates a situation as to where we are at this point in time. Because if I look at the pandemic, when it had started, there was all this talk about creating additional beds, and we heard about the Nazareth facility, 1,000 beds and facilities right across the country. But what had happened over a period of time, we see that nothing of that materialized. We in a situation right now as we stand, where hospitals are desperately short of beds. And we are told that the Nazareth facility was dismantled because there is a shortage of doctors. So what I'm saying is you have all these issues that are playing out in the background, and this obviously gives people every reason to retreat into that negative mindset.
Sure. Agreed, 100%. I think what we're confronting is a colossal failure of leadership, failure of vision, and it's not as if we don't have people with those skills, knowledge, and expertise. We do. But somehow, especially in the public sphere, we leave the best and we choose the worst. Let me say straight out, I've known every single president that we've had since democracy, and I've known them personally. The current president I've known from 1974 when he was a student. He was detained as a witness, when we were arrested as students. Now, when you confront the kinds of issues, they have become almost synonymous with democracy. our people begin to lose hope and faith that leadership is there for all of us. They recognize that leadership is utterly self-centered, and they do things for their own interests. All the promises, and indeed many of these so-called family gatherings on a Sunday night, just become things where people just don't want to hear it anymore. Worse still, when you look at that political leadership, people say, well, if it isn't him, who else do we have? So it's almost as if you've got the best of the worst in a society like ours. And we've got excellent people. We've got excellent people in the majority party who have the ability and who get bypassed. And I think we're confronting a stalemating game. One group stalemates the other, and largely because people are stealing. They're stealing, they're raping the country, and they're robbing us dry. And this is not a poor country. This is a very wealthy country. It's one of still the wealthiest countries in the world. Yet, all around us, we see the shack settlements, we see poverty, and we see this big lie about jobs going to be created. What did our recent stats tell us? And this is official government stats. 74.7% of young people out of school and out of work. They're not going to be jobs. The world has changed dramatically. It's become highly mechanized, and technology has overtaken us. And yet, these people are still talking about 4IR. In other parts of the world, they don't even talk about it. These kinds of things get perpetuated as if you've got to wait. If I'm sitting there as the leader, you wait on me. So what we've actually created is serious dependency. We haven't created that critical insight, innovate, and for our young people to mediate the world. The old thing of we will find a job for you, it's no more going to happen. And it's actually a lie that gets perpetuated. And you'll see it if local government elections are allowed. They'll perpetuate the same nonsense and we'll be worse off. No, we need to get back to our sense of agency. And all of you have been speaking about the sense of community and communities in action. We need to do these things for ourselves and understand that waiting for government to do anything, when it's so hamstrung, when they're stalemating each other, when they are stealing full parcels of 350 rand, that's serious. Yet we've got compassionate, we've got people who are giving. Look at Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman. Look at the gift of the givers. Look at the kinds of community tides that happen within the Muslim community where people share a percentage of their earnings or give something to the less well-off. We can return to that. But you see some of the examples we're dealing with, individual examples, for instance, where this person says, my wife will divorce me. You know that relationship was based on poor foundations anyway. And we need to return to some basic humanity, which both Ruby and Idris and you, Inayat, are speaking about. That we as human beings need to respond to each other, not wait and think somebody else is going to do things, because they won't. And it's going to take much longer to overcome this pandemic and get on with life. We're not going to go ever back to the life we left behind in March last year. It's going to be a dramatically changed world, as it has already become. More people are going to be unemployed. More people are going to be angry. More people are going to respond literally violently. And we have dumbed down our education system to such an extent that people are willing to believe, for instance, let's just take yesterday's Concord ruling, that, oh no, this man was treated badly. He was the president of the country. He treated us badly. And the Concord found for us for once. So we need brave souls to take us out of this, but also we must not lose our sense of entrepreneurship, our sense of agency. You know, we worked to topple the worst apartheid system that was declared a crime against humanity. How is it that we allow some of these people to perpetuate the same thing? So it tells us that the dumbing down of our education makes us more dependent and makes us reliant on external instead of self-affirmation. And all our scriptures talk about people being good, doing good, being the best they can be. And in particular, the Quran says, do not an oppressor or an oppressed be. And we've allowed this to happen. We've seen it, and we think maybe it won't impact on us. No, it affects all of us. And as Ruby has pointed out, what about those people who are forced to come to work using the kinds of terrible conditions, the taxis, where it's ridiculous to allow it to continue? But you see, based on the kind of patronage system that we seem to have, the rule of law is crumbling. So we now need brave people to stand up and be counted. And that's why the few of us who have the voice will be held to account if we don't use that voice and return to communal well-being. Help your brothers, your sisters, because all of us are brothers and sisters in the eyes of that one Almighty.
Thank you for that, Ruby. Now, just looking at people that have become obsessed with the pandemic, we know that there are many people that have basically been consumed with this pandemic in terms of spreading information. And in many instances, you would find it even on social media. I've seen it on a number of groups that I belong to. We even see it in family groups, where inevitably you will have one family member that thrives on sending out negative signals and negative messaging. Now, all of this at the end of the day plays on the psyche or the mindset of the people that are following that chat group or the family group or whatever it is at the end of the day, and creates, this panic, puts people in a state of anxiety, depression, and the like. And just your thoughts on people who are consumed with this pandemic or have become consumed with what we see around us.
Look, I mean, people who are putting out false information and conspiracy theorists and not checking information before they put it out and creating a sense of panic in people, it's very tragic that that's happening, because that is driving a lot of mental health issues. Like you say, it's driving a lot of confusion in many people, particularly, and sometimes we wonder that, I've been wondering that even in people who normally you would think, they would look at information and wade through the information and see what is real or what is not real. There's a grip of something. There's a grip of taking on what the social media is putting out there. I mean, I really do appeal to people to actually really be very careful in terms of what you're putting out there, because it is part of what's driving the pandemic as well. And I don't think we're actually understanding how much this is driving the pandemic as well. The denialism, the fear around certain messages are potently extremely dangerous. And so my message would be that for people who are driving this, if we can reflect, and we can reflect really deeply, instead of being reactionary. And part of it is also their fear. So we've got to understand that with compassion as well, that part of it is the fear and holding on to anything and working through their own psychology through this fear. But it is so crucial to understand that this is what's driving the pandemic as well. And that if we're talking about agency, as Idris and Dr. Cooper is saying, is if we're thinking about ourselves, if we're reflecting on our own agency as well, then we need to reflect on what we're putting out there as well. And it's our responsibility then to look for the information that is accurate, although it's very hard sometimes to work through it, but it becomes imperative that we do this. And I think this is why, for me, I'm driving the community message as well, is that without us coming together in a creative way, we're going to find that we're going to sit in pockets with our own mental paranoias and our own mental absorbed in our own difficulties. We're going to sit in our bubbles of families, and we're going to forget that there is a country. We live in South Africa, and that we live with many other marginalized communities, and there's millions and millions of people who are in those situations. And we need to gather the information together so that we can allow for communal interactions and information to flow. And we need to take why this information is flowing into account as well, because it is flowing and doing certain things, because it's also driven by fear and a protection that people are looking for. But we know we have all these challenges. We know it's driving the pandemic. We know the government is failing us, and failing us hopelessly. So how are we going to look for the solutions? And for me, very much the message is, is it going to be something we look at in an individual response? As psychologists, I can tell you that we are overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the work that needs to happen, and we need to question whether this individual response is the only way, because it's not the only way, and we need to look for the other ways, the more empowering ways of allowing people to think through what is false information as well. And, the aunt, the uncle, the person sitting on WhatsApp giving out these informations, and how we can shift those thoughts around a little bit to move away from this misinformation that drives the pandemic as well.
Yes, Idris, and I think just to follow up from what Ruby is saying, in terms of the information overload that we have and the negative messaging that goes out. Now, clearly, we know we've got a leadership problem in the country, but also leadership within our communities. Because at the end of the day, somebody needs to take control. Someone needs to take charge of the situation to try, at the very least, to improve the situation.
See, what is important is this. We need to be honest in terms of our communities. We are a very, very divided community. You find that those individuals that are vociferous, they have their followers, and the followers sometimes are more fanatical than those individuals. And you find that even, so many WhatsApp groups, the people have become so volatile, right? In terms, there is no consensus, nothing whatsoever. Even at this particular point, many individuals, I won't say many, but a fair number of individuals, they think this whole thing is just a figment of the imagination. They've adopted a fatalistic attitude. This is it, we're all going to die, right? But you know what? As any individual, as people of faith or any other individual tells you, you got to look after yourself, right? You got to put the safety belt on. You got to lock your door when you go to sleep, right? And so on and so forth. You got to do that. If something happens, having done all of that is out of your control. And I think this is so important, and I'm so glad Salaamedia is talking about this. These, and I see it all the time. People have lost their sense of humor. There's no more laughter in the homes. There's only sadness. There's negativity. And as Ruby mentioned also, the whole idea, the question you asked of her about social media, that people have become so sedentary. The only thing is about looking at the messages, spending hours upon messages. What has happened to the mind? The mind is very, very fertile. They have stopped reading. They have stopped engaging. And whether we like it or not, we have space around us to bring hope to other people. We have space around us to rethink. In fact, when Dr. Seth Cooper spoke about education, and I'm very, very passionate about it, this pandemic has made me realize that schooling and university education has become overinflated. Who are the people that are getting the brownie points today? Who are the individuals? Individuals that are creative, who think outside the box. It's a time to reinvent ourselves, and we can still be productive. I just want to share with you a particular statistic that I came across, which I often use in my presentations. I think it was Stanford University and NASA also did a survey of children, and they tested the giftedness. So they tested children between the ages of 4 and 5, 1,000 of them, and they found 95% of them were regarded as creative geniuses. The same children who were between the ages of 8 and 10, the percentage went down to 32%. The same children amongst the young people now between the ages of 13 and 15, the percentage went down to 12%. And the point that Dr. Cooper mentioned about dumbing us down. So some people, and I remember one scholar mentioned that painful though it is, it's a gift also in the sense that it forces you to reflect on your life, asking the other questions. Who am I? What is my purpose? What are my relationships with people, right? Am I bringing hope and joy to other people? So I think, the bottom line is this, that we must not see this only in terms of negative, sadness, pessimism, despondency. And I think if you're going to do that, you'll find we are going to regret it much later in our life, because in the end, we are sabotaging it becomes self-sabotaging beliefs. And the last point that I want to make is this, that we have to create an environment in which conversations take place, in which we speak what's in our heart. And it's sad, it is very, very sad that people keep it in the heart, they implode, and as a result you find, therefore I'm not surprised that the rate of suicide is so high, unbelievable. It's become a global phenomenon. And I really hope and pray that, as individuals, notwithstanding our own challenges, that we do not forget people around us. And it is in giving that we receive. It's very, very important to uplift people's spirits, to give people hope, to bring people together and say, you know what, together we can make a difference.
Well, certainly, Dr. Cooper, I know you're going to leave us by around about 8:15. My producer had obviously informed me. Just final thoughts before we go for an air break.
Look, I think that the advice that Idris has been giving and Ruby has been touching on, that return to the spirit of community, that return to the sense of inner creativity, helping yourself in order that you can help others, is utterly important. Nobody is going to come to our rescue, but know that this too shall pass. And it will only pass successfully if we obey the minimum requirements and if we take care, number one, of ourselves, and number two, because if we're not well psychologically in particular, we're not going to be useful to those around us. So it's utterly important that each one of us must acknowledge our own shortcomings, because none of us is perfect. We're human beings made of flesh and blood and not just machines. And because of that, we will have good things. There will be places where we may stray. But if we connect with each other, we will be able to overcome this together. We cannot do it alone. We can only do it with other people. Other people make us human beings, and how we re-socialize ourselves in terms of our belief systems and in terms of helping each other. What I started with, the issue of compassion, the issue of caring for self and other, and consideration, especially of those who are worse than us. Whatever we may confront, when we look at somebody else and recognize that they still do what they do for so little, yet we have certain attitudes. We must remove ourselves of that, cleanse ourselves of that, and be able to connect with self and each other. And I want to leave you in the capable hands of Ruby and Idris, and thank you, Inayat.
Well, thank you very much to you, Dr. Cooper, as well. And we do appreciate your time with us here on Salaamedia this evening. And to Idris and Ruby, we're going to go for a break. And we'll be back after this. We'll also be joined by Mariam Mia.
Listen to Salaamedia.
Once again, Maulana Timol will be doing the annual Qurbani. Many people in the villages live well below the poverty line and only eat meat on the days of Eid al-Adha. Support this cause at 1,785 Rand for 7 shares or 255 Rand per share. Contact Maulana Timol, Maulana Sajjad, Maulana Hamad or Maulana Abbad on 011-852-6324 or 8613. or 072-299-9268. All slaughtering will be supervised by a team of ulama. Visit www.operationqurbani.org.za.
Penny Appeal Love Palestine campaign. Let us stand in solidarity and create an awareness of the plight of the people of Palestine. Support our initiative in providing medical assistance and food security. Donate towards our urgent appeal with your zakat, sadaqah or lillah. Visit our website www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573. Penny Appeal Love Palestine. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference. Don't be sheepish. Qurbani with Penny Appeal. Affordable and rewardable. For just 700 Rand in Africa, Gaza 3,500 Rand, South Africa and Yemen 2,000 Rand. You can reap the rewards of your sacrifice. Go on and do your bit to banish poverty. Only the best animals, 100% reliable and guaranteed notice of your Qurbani done. Call 031 1100 573 or visit www.pennyappeal.org.za to book your Qurbani today. WhatsApp 081 407 2753 for more information. Trust us to deliver your sacrifice where needed most, allowing you to reap the rewards of this blessed action. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference.
Dad, well, I've been chatting with an investment broker today and...
Broker? Did the broker tell you that our economy is a mess? There's bushfires in Australia, America wanted World War III, and now the coronavirus is traveling around the world.
Well, I also thought about purchasing some crypto.
Crypto? What's that, like another pyramid scheme? I don't trust what I can't see.
There's an apartment in Belisa.
So whole your family will be asking to stay there for free. And what if the government takes it away, eh?
Dad, I don't think it works like that.
I'll tell you what works. Gold. At your age, I invested in gold coins and it paid for your university fees and your wedding. No contracts, no agreements. Your investment is in your hands and you own it. With a 70% growth in only 5 years, do you still doubt gold investment? Contact RJ Coin today, 031 202 4701, or visit them at 151 Stephen Lamini Road in Musgrave, Durban. Randery Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange, your passport to gold investment.
Sustain, sacrifice, share. This Eid al-Adha, donate your Qurbani through Africa Muslims Agency. We ensure that your Udhiyah Qurbani not only feeds the poor, but creates sustainable incomes for local farmers, brings the practice of sacrifice to the villages, and shares the spirit of Eid. Sponsor in South Africa for 2,400 Rand. Africa, 1,500 Rand. Palestine, 6,150 Rand. Syria, 4,000 Rand. Donate online at africamuslimsagency.co.za or call 011-834-8685. Africa Muslims Agency, inspiring the spirit of giving.
Gathered here with my family, my neighbors and my friends, standing firm together against oppression, holding hands. It doesn't matter where you're from, or if you're young or woman or man, we're here for the same reason. We want to take back our land. Oh God, thank you for giving us the strength to hold on. And now we're here together, calling you for freedom, freedom. We know you can hear our call. Oh, we're calling for.
The time is just gone 13 minutes past 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights with Inayat Wadi. And tonight we are talking about the psychological impact of the pandemic, and also at the same time looking at issues like mental health and mental fatigue as a result of the pandemic. We have assembled a panel consisting of Idris Khamisa, we have got Ruby Patel, and we're also going to be joined shortly by Mariam Mia. So as we continue with the broadcast this evening, you can send through your comments, and these comments you can put through on Salaamedia's Facebook page, and also looking at some of the other issues that we will be talking about. And these are real issues that we as a community are faced with. I see Appa Mariam Mia has joined us. Appa Mariam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings to yourself, Inayat, as well as your esteemed panelists and all our viewers and listeners.
Yes, and I see Idris is on, and we're still waiting for Ruby to connect with us once again. But Idris, I just want to obviously talk about, looking at society as we are at this point in time. Now, obviously, many families, many people have suffered losses in more ways than one. I don't think there's a single individual in this country who doesn't know someone who has either been affected by the virus or has passed away. Now, clearly, this is a problem, because I've seen a message that has come through in talking about the impact that has been more severe on families that have lost more than one member. He's talking about financial implications for families that have been adverse. And also at the same time, you spoke about issues like disharmony within families, but also at the same time, there are those that deny the existence of COVID, and this doesn't help people that are affected. And just to look at this particular aspect, because there are real issues on the ground that we are faced with right now. And how do we cope? How do we cope with these issues, with these losses? Because people haven't found closure as far as their loved ones are concerned. In many instances, we've seen straight from the Ghusl Khana, straight to the Qabristan. So there's been absolutely no closure whatsoever. There are many people, the moment the person goes into hospital, you're not allowed to visit the hospital, and a person could spend weeks in hospital, and that is the last you would see of that person. And just talking about coping mechanisms surrounding these particular aspects.
Yeah, Alhamdulillah, the situation that we are dealing with, as we said, it is completely unprecedented. And you're right, people do not have an opportunity to grieve, to hug their family members, to get support. In fact, other family members are even too scared to visit that particular home. And as a result, they have not got any closure, right? But I think, with all what you are saying, right, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, those that have passed away as a result of the pandemic, I mean, they are given the status of shaheed, of martyrdom. And they say those that are surviving those individuals who are patient, they will also get the blessing of martyrdom. But I think for me, a critical aspect is this, that in the end, it is an opportune time for each one of us to reconnect. And Seth Cooper was speaking about the spiritual dimension, whatever. Reconnect with Allah, to reconnect with the Quran, to reconnect with all of these things. Because in the end, whether we like it or not, death is inevitable. And but in terms of the human element, the raw emotion, the sadness, the trauma of one person passing away, the father, right, unbeknown to his wife who is in the next room, she's not told that he passes away. The burial takes place. The next day, she passes away. And there are so many of those very, very poignant things. So I think what's important is this, that how do you help these individuals? We are told that for 3 days you are allowed to mourn. I'm reminded of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when he was burying his son, Ibrahim alayhi salam, is burying his son, and he said, and some of the Sahaba were surprised that he was crying. So he says, the eyes weep and the heart grieves, but the tongue will not say anything that would be, negative towards the Creator, as it were. In other words, I'm going to show emotion. It's my son. I feel the grief. I feel the pain. At the same token, I will not say, why me? Why my son? And I think this is a huge, huge test on individuals. In fact, today, I said to people, I know of so many cases of one particular family, for about 5 or 6 consecutive Fridays, they lost one member of the family. And then you ask, what do you tell that person? What kind of empathy do you show that individual? And what is important, I'm so glad that many people are doing it. They're doing a lot of Quran khatams, groups are doing it as individuals, and they are reconnecting, they're praying for them, and praying for the colleagues, so on and so forth. So I think what's important is this, that sometimes when you are so concerned about your safety, think about that individual who lost a loved one. Pick up the phone, send a heartwarming message to that individual. Do not go there and, pontificate and all of that. There's no time for lectures. There's no time to say, you know what, you've got to accept it. That is inevitable. We know it is. We know it is. So I think in the end, what is required is compassion, is required emotional support, and it's prayer. And I think the most effective antidote to all of this is to reconnect ourselves spiritually to our Creator, and to make sure that your ties with your loved ones are strong. You forgive them. Forget the fear if you lose that particular individual. And I always say there are 2 kinds of tears that you shed. There's one tear, those tears are for the loved ones that you lost. You loved them, they loved you, you're going to miss them. The other tears are painful tears, tears of regret. So it's an opportunity for each one of us to put our house in order, to put ourselves in order, put our relationships in order, to realign our moral compass, to embrace the beautiful example of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and be an ambassador for the Deen of Islam.
Yes, I think what you mentioned is absolutely critical, very, very crucial, Idris Bhai. Abba Mariam, just to bring you into the discussion, and I know you obviously deal with many people, you deal with women with trauma, you deal with children as well. But just before we get to that, we're talking about the psychological impact and the mental impact. Now, you personally, you yourself and Adil obviously ended up in hospital, obviously having tested with COVID, and you yourself, I mean, can bear testimony to the fact, to the mental trauma, to the psychological trauma, and what families actually experience.
Absolutely, Brother Inayat. And look, at that time when you're so ill and you need to be hospitalized, you focus, you're trying to be positive. You know, COVID is it's a mental illness as much as it is a physical illness, because for once you are faced with your mortality, in that you don't know what your outcome is going to be. And I did not realize the impact it had for my family, or how traumatic it was for my children and for my parents. It was only after I arrived and I was back in studio, and I think, Brother Inayat, you had a welcome back at a tribute, and there was voice notes from my mother. And I heard my mother send this voice note in which she was so tearful, and she said, Mariam, you know, we were so afraid. For the first time, you said you in your life you were too tired to speak. And that's when myself and the entire community knew you were not well, because you had no energy to even speak or say anything. And that was for me a telling point to say that how it affects you. Because when you're in hospital, you're focusing on your own health. You don't realize the impact it has on your loved ones, your friends, your community, because they're afraid. They don't know which way will be your end, whether you're going to survive, or you will not make it through. So for me, that is difficult. It's only, we need to realize, you know, while we're sitting in hospital, already the trauma begins when somebody tests positive, for the family, for the children, for everybody around.
Yes, Appa. I see Ruby is back with us as well. Ruby, now the reason why we've got Appa Mariam here is also we want to focus on children. And sometimes we don't talk a lot about the impact that this virus is having, or this pandemic is having, on little kids, because their lives have been disrupted as much as the adults' lives have been disrupted. You know, many of them have seen their parents pass on. Many of them have seen their grandparents, who are they so close with. You know, we always talk about the relationship between grandparents and their grandchildren, and we see, you know, many of them have actually passed on. Their school lives have disrupted, and being social animals we need that physical contact, that physical interaction with other children, with family members and the like. And I just want to spend a few minutes just talking about children and how children have been affected, but more importantly, the mental consequences for these children.
Yes, Inayat, I think we're forgetting the children very much in this pandemic, and it is children across all ages. So I'm going to start by first talking about the children, preschool children, 0 to 5, 6-year-olds. I think we're forgetting the developmental impact this is having on early childhood development. Not only are they seeing all of this and experiencing a heightened level of sadness, grief, loss, but their developmental processes are being impacted on, as well as families are struggling with the huge fallouts and consequences, the economic, social, psychological consequences of that. And then, Inayat, what we're seeing with school-going children, I myself was talking to some students this afternoon, and the psychological assessments that we're doing, children who generally struggle with attentional issues are just falling through the cracks now. They're completely falling through the cracks. Their schooling has been disrupted, not just for a few months, but we're going into the second year now. So we're talking of 2 years of academic, scholastic issues that they're dealing with. And with that comes a whole lot of anxiety. There's a whole lot of aggression. There's a lot of angry behavior that's coming with the grief and sadness as well, a lot of confusion, and parents are struggling to hold this together for the children because they themselves are struggling with so many difficult issues. So we're seeing it across board. I'm seeing it with university students, where I was talking to some colleagues today as well. Students are just generally struggling with their mental health. Anxiety is on the rise, depression's on the rise, stress is something that's phenomenal at the moment, and we just don't have enough resources to go around to assist children and to assist adolescents and young adults cope with this. So there is a sense of being very overwhelmed at the moment, and it's very true that we've got to find something, some meaning making in all of this, some process of trying to work through what families are going through and children are going through. So we should forget that children are actually not just experiencing psychological problems, but scholastic problems as well, with that physical issues, and it's all combining to put an enormous amount of pressure on children, and they're losing 2 years in their developmental phase already, and we have no idea when the vaccines are going to come, when are they going to be completed. So we're looking at this year definitely, and possibly into next year as well. So
Yes.
it's a huge developmental chunk that's been taken out of children's lives.
Yes, and obviously, Idris, from what Jolly is saying, the disruption that this causes within the family circle, as far as children are concerned, and particularly when children are exposed, when their development is being compromised, when they can't lead their normal lives as children, and this ultimately impacts on family life. And I know you've always advocated this healthy family life, this relationship that parents have with their children, husband and wife. But ultimately, it is impacting, and here is a challenge. This is a huge challenge to keep a family together under these abnormal circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm certainly noticing with the work that I'm doing is that anger and aggression levels have increased in many homes, and sort of gender-based violence, anger directed at children has increased. So these are all challenges in the family that we are facing, and once again, how are we going to address this? How are we going to think about this? How are we going to reflect about this? And I think that with the pandemic of this nature, with what we're dealing with, we really have to dig very deep into our self-reflective capacities and capabilities, and try and understand, even though we overwhelmed ourselves, what this is actually meaning and how we can support each other through this, particularly when families are under so much pressure at the moment.
Yes, Idris, you can continue.
Yeah, you see, a very important aspect is this, that if you look at a scenario, if you look at the father or mother, whoever is a breadwinner of the home, he's so consumed with his anxiety, his self-doubts, he's not too sure whether he's going to get retrenched. And as a result, when he comes home, he's preoccupied, he's not present. And as a result, there is a detachment between him and the rest of the family. And children are children. Children are like us, the gregarious beings. They like to play. They like to, and now because they cannot go outside, they're confined to the four walls of the home, as it were. And this loss, it is really going to, depending on each family, the possibilities of it stunting their growth is going to be very, very great. And you find it is further compounded through online teaching, that teachers themselves, instead of them teaching in inverted commas, they are lecturing. So children, again, are going to become passive receptacles of knowledge. They are either overexposed to television, they are into social media and so on and so forth. So family life can be profoundly impacted. But having said that, There are numerous great examples of families who took this opportunity of the time to reconnect with each family member, to create a family routine, to relook at the family values and the family goals. And I was saying this to someone today. If you were to write down every day what you need to do tomorrow, you'll find you can perhaps fill the whole page. There are so many things that can be done. Now, the reason I'm saying that we also need to be proactive. We mustn't be reactive. We need, for example, in our homes to create a culture of reading. We need to create a home. And I say all children need the 6 things, the 6 A's, I call it. They all need acceptance. They need affirmation. They need appreciation. They need acknowledgement. They need attention. And they need to be given positive attributes. And this is very, very important that when you look at the home scenario, I think sometimes it's our failure to exploit what we have that is going to create a problem that will further make our families dysfunctional.
Yes. Apa Mariam, just to bring you into the discussion now, obviously you've got first-hand experience. You deal with trauma on a day-to-day basis. You deal with trauma that women suffer in their homes. You deal with trauma as far as children are concerned. And I'm sure, there's quite a bit that you could share with us in this regard. Apa Mariam, if you could unmute. Okay, you
can
unmuted.
you hear me? I think it was mute. Yes, it was from your side. Yes, prior I was doing bereavement counseling maybe once a week, once a fortnight, and now I'm counseling everybody, males, females, children of differing ages, in terms of this. So it's been difficult because death is a finality. There's nothing. It's the end. You have to help children understand this. In terms of you are traveling on a one road now and you've come to a stop street. And now on this journey, if it's your mom or your dad or your grandparents, they're no longer with you on this journey. The memories are there, but physically they're not there. And how I engage with children, the 3 to 5 year olds will be different in terms of this. So how you deal with the children will depend on their age, their gender, developmental stage, personality, as well as the relationship of the person who has died, as well as family circumstances, and also very important how they perceive others grieving around them and the amount of support children require. So this is very, very difficult. And then also I had a case where the mom had passed on while giving birth, and it was due to post-COVID related illness, and she left a 13-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old behind. And each child processed this death differently. And well, for the younger one, the concern was, who is going to take care of me now? Who is going to be that mommy figure? And children at that age need reassurance that we are going to care for you now, a specific person, a routine. This is what's going to happen. In terms of teenagers, it's a lot more difficult to understand. They are undergoing psychological changes in their body, physiological changes in their body. They developing a sense of identity. It's closely linked to their self-esteem. So it becomes difficult, as Ruby had mentioned. There's a lot of anger. And at that stage, the grief is accompanied by anger. So it's really difficult, and the physical separation makes it all the more difficult. That is why I advocate, please, you might not be there physically, but please do contact the bereaved family, call them, video call them, send a message of support, send meals, but please, you need to show that love is there and care is there, because it's having a huge impact. And also, it's important that we speak about it and you use correct terminology. Let's not use euphemisms, because if you tell a 5-year-old child, about a loss, sorry about your loss, or grandparents, and you use the word loss, they understand something's lost, it can be found. They don't understand the reality of death. So use the word death. Say what happens, explain. In fact, I think now is the time, if this conversation didn't happen, it should be happening, where every family should speak about death and have a death plan. We have a life plan. We speak about it to our children. We have our bucket list. We have this, but there's two realities in life: the day you're born and the day you are going to die. And it's important, as we sit down as individual families, we need to speak about our mortality, about our death, what will happen, the processes, so children understand it is part of life. Death is part of life. So it's very, very important that families now start having and speaking about a death plan and talking about death. It makes the process slightly easier, especially for younger children, to understand and to process and make them part of the decision making. Don't whisper. And for very, very young children who are grieving over a parent, a grandparent, and that, another good way is let them have a memory box. Get a box, a treasure chest, and say, this is our memory box. This is, maybe keep a scarf of the granny or something special, and collect memories and share in the memories. I say, over a cup of coffee, 3-4 weeks into the bereavement, speak about happy moments. Ask the children you go around, what was your best memory of grandpa, or what was your memory of mom or dad, or that. Share memories, create a treasure trove of memories. I know 20-25 years ago, when a person was dead, memories are dead, that person's memories were also buried. Today it's no longer like this. We embrace the memories, we share the memories, and fortunately there's good support systems out there in terms of counseling for very young kids, in terms of play therapy, and that's the support systems and structures are out there. Please, I implore families and parents to please reach out and make use of these structures. Children need the support. They require reassurance. They require compassion, and they make them part of the decision process moving forward.
Yes, shukran for that. And also, Ruby, just following up from what Appa Mariam is saying, in terms of using the correct language, because I think this is very, very important. It's sometimes, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think that is absolutely important. And also at the same time, just to link up with language, is there such a thing as mental preparedness? Because we are in these times, in these uncertain times, but mentally, we need to be prepared.
I mean, the one thing I don't want to lose, I just want to elaborate before I answer that, is when we're talking about something having been lost, when we're talking about grief, when we're talking about death, okay, that's not the only thing that this pandemic has taken away from us. So many more children, and we sometimes forget this, is that they are experiencing grief and loss of many different kinds, a loss of a lifestyle, a loss of particular things at home, loss of being able to go to school, loss of safety, not having a danger of an unseen virus around. So for children, and even for adults, what we're experiencing is not just something when someone dies, but the whole process of this pandemic is this losses on so many different levels which we don't even understand yet, and we haven't even started making sense of yet. And we need to take that into account as well, that our lifestyles have changed, and this pandemic has definitely, like Dr. Cooper said earlier, our terrain has changed, and we don't know. There is an unknown there that we don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, or if we're ever going to come back to our baseline again. So we, in many ways, we are unsure about this. We're scared about this, but somewhere inside of us, we're also very sad about this, and this particular loss as well. So that's the one thing I wanted to pick up on, that loss is not just the death and the finality of death. And then the question that you asked, I think in preparedness, what we mean when we say that we've got to be prepared, mentally prepared and psychologically prepared, I think what we're saying is how we're going to find meaning in all of this. How are we going to travel through this, and how are we going to try and understand this? And really, at the end of the day, how each one of us is going to make personal meaning out of this. What does it mean for us to have this experience, to be ill and to have things taken away and to face death and to face our mortality and the meaning that we make in terms of our mortality as well. So that is part of the preparedness as well, or part of the road that we need to take in trying to unravel and understand what we are feeling and where our feelings are going to. As we face more and more death, yeah.
Okay, Idris, just I know we've been talking about the family, but just talking about the extended family, and we're talking about the immediate communities around us, because this is where we have most of, outside of our families, we have most of our interaction, whether our kids are going to the local school or the local madrasa, or we're going to the local masjid as well. And just looking at community preparedness, and is enough being done, number one? And the second thing is in terms of leadership within community. And what we find in many communities, and you alluded to a tweet earlier on, where sometimes we get many mixed messages, we get mixed signals that are going out that create this rift, that create this division, that create this debate. And at a time like this, I don't think we can afford any of this.
Yeah, I think what's important, I don't believe enough is being done. Enough is being done. And I think more can be done. And when I say more can be done, what am I saying? Every community has what you call a brain's trust. Individuals that have got wisdom. It's easy to pursue knowledge, but wisdom is very, very important. How you articulate that knowledge, how you share information without creating a collective panic, as it were. How do you share information that will help the individual in his home, whatever, young people, old people, so on and so forth. And that social support is very, very critical. That's part of who we are. This is part of what Muslims are all about, creating the support. It should come naturally to us, something that is foisted upon you. And I think what happens when the collective leadership of institutions, I think it's important to look at the environment around them, to look at what is happening. We need to be proactive. We need to see what is happening, and we need to continue to monitor the situation and give the right kind of messages. And the messages themselves must not be messages that are dispiriting, will make you despondent, will make you pessimistic, where you give up on life. And it's an opportunity for us to bring hope to the others. And in terms of leadership, and this is a very, very sad indictment on our community. There are many individuals who are in position of leadership. We would expect them to be authoritative, but they are more authoritarian in terms of their attitude. And you find, and as a result of that particular approach, instead of them engaging, endearing people around them, they're alienating it. They are going completely antithetical to the model of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And I must say this, this is more on a very, very personal level, right? People often ask me, Idris, I see you are smiling, how do you maintain your sanity? And I said, you know what? I maintain my sanity in many, many ways. And one of the ways I do it, of course, is I surrender to Allah without being fatalistic. I am trying to realign my moral compass. I'm trying to increase my ibadah and to do zikr. I'm trying, to connect with people. And there are many people who contact me over the phone, whatever. And I want to give people hope. And I want to do that. And I find that when I do that, and I'm sure, as Ruby is doing in her practice, Mariam is also doing, it is so uplifting. And for a believer, there is no place for despondency. No place. You never give up on the mercy of Allah. And what happens is this, because of our humanity, we see only the tragedy, but we do not see the hand of Allah's mercy there, right? And I think it's important for us to re-look at what we are doing. And we talk about leadership outside, but also in terms of the home, to re-look at our relationship where children should feel free to hug their father, the mother, say, Daddy, I'm feeling very anxious. What can I do? And it's for us to give them answers, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yes, Appa Mariam, just focusing, and I know, with the type of work you're doing and social support and the structures that we have in place to provide the type of social support that Idris has been talking about. I'm sure, there's quite a bit that you've experienced now in the last year or so.
Absolutely. And for me, I think this is one of the positives and silver lining of this pandemic is how communities have become connected. I live in a suburb there where it's a very multicultural community, and it's amazing. We have this COVID cooking for COVID support group, and we have people from all races, walks of life, nationality, preparing meals. We have a central depot. Meals are labeled halal, vegetarian, kosher. Everybody is rallying together to offer support. Your meal might go to somebody that's a total stranger, and you see the gratitude, you see. So I think also, while there has been lots of grief, many deaths, immense sadness and despair, there's also an outpouring of kindness, compassion. We've connected on a different level. So for me, this has definitely been a silver lining where our faith in humanity has been restored, in that we support each other even though we might not know each other, but our struggle is the same, our circumstances is the same, our life experience has pivoted, has changed, we have an alternate way of life. And yes, we realize human beings are social beings by their nature, and although we might be physically isolating, spiritually we all connecting on various levels. And for me, this is one of the positives, and I'd like to actually acknowledge all those community champions, warriors, for taking the time out, acting selflessly, and showing up and providing support to those in need.
Shukran for that. Ruby, just to look at the maintenance of good mental health under the present conditions, how do we keep ourselves motivated, energized, inspired, so that we can obviously maintain a level of good mental health and remain sane, for want of a better term?
I get that question quite often these days, and my response to that sometimes is to say that we forget that when people are scrambling around to find a meal, when even that meal is not there, when people are scrambling around just for basic life sustenance, it's very, very hard to look around and think of anything different. So one of the ways that I think about this and I process this is that even as we're looking after our own mental health, and we have the privilege, many of us may have the privilege of looking at our own mental health and looking at things every day, in terms of looking for the hope, looking for the positiveness, looking for the pluses in our life, how we make meaning, the family, the cohesion. That perhaps part of our mental health is also not to isolate ourselves and just think about ourselves, but in giving off and finding the compassion. I mean, we are at a point in time in history where we can really reach out, and our own mental health is so tied up in many ways to everyone else. And even as we look after ourselves and find the hope and the way forward through our pain and our darkness, that reaching out to others and thinking about the kind of work that Miriam is doing as well, is another way of engaging with our own mental health, but also in driving something that's a little bit bigger, that can give us a little bit more meaning in what we're going through as well.
Yes.
So for me, it's a two-way thing. It's individual, but in finding our individual health, it's reaching out with the compassion that we need to at the moment, across race, across gender, across divides, and finding our space in the world in this. And I think in engaging leaders, engaging healers in the communities, engaging different areas of leadership is going to be crucial in how we protect our own sense of well-being as well.
Yes, it is now just looking at communities, and I think most communities that we know of, we've got the skills base, we've got the professionals, we've got the expertise to deal with a whole host of issues for the betterment of our communities, for the betterment of our families, in terms of addressing some of the issues, some of the challenges that we are faced as a result of this pandemic. It's only the question of basically bringing all of this together in a harmonious manner, and at the end of the day, to look at the ultimate goal. And what is that goal? To try and improve the situation, to try and make sure that we make the best out of a worse situation that we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah, you see, sadly, perhaps some people say it's understandable, that it has become almost the survival of the fittest. It's about me, myself, I, and my family. And we have always been known for our generosity and the capacity we have to help other people. And we are a community that is endowed with a lot of skills, and we can utilize those skills to develop entrepreneurs. We can use the skills not only in terms of our community, to help the wider community be part of this humanity. And I think it makes a big difference in terms that we should not be just inward looking. We should be out there and we should engage. And you need to look at like-minded people. There are many like-minded people. There are some individuals that are toxic, for sure, agreed, right? They are naysayers, right? The others will say nothing will work. But what we need is to look at other individuals. You require a core of individuals who know other individuals to think of a creative program. Because today what is happening, every person that is walking around, he wants answers, you know? He wants answers. He's got real problems. The problems are palpable. They're real. It's all around them. The landscape, the whole world has changed radically. So I think, it just requires individuals to show the initiative. And I would like to see that our masajids become those centers, those centers. They should be the pulse of the community, where people gravitate towards the masjid. And we have several programs, be it online or whatever it is. So what happens, each of the masajids should have some kind of idea of the demographics around that place. And we need to relook at that, because this year has asked us many, many questions. This pandemic has said to us quite clearly, openly, it says, you know what? You all do not have leaders. You know what? It's about you. You know what? Our children are growing up rudderless. You know what? They see no models in us. In fact, they see individuals that are in conflict. Even scholars are in conflict with each other. And it is impacting even on the faith. And as a result, many of them have become skeptics. So I think many things need to be done. We mustn't sit there with the entitlement and saying, you know what are others supposed to do and they're not doing. Ask yourself what you are really doing. And inshallah, you know what, it just takes one small step. I'm reminded of the story which I want to share. It's a very, very popular story of one man was walking down the seashore, and he saw someone throwing something into the sea. And he went there, went closer. He noticed there were thousands of starfish there. So he asked the young boy, he says, young boy, tell me, what are you doing here? Oh, he says, well, I'm just throwing the starfish into the sea. So he says that, why are you doing this? He says, the starfish cannot survive on the shore. He said, but what difference can you make? He says, well, he picked up one, he threw that into the sea. So you see, I made a difference to that starfish. Yes, the challenges are great, but moaning and groaning about it is not going to help. And the last point I want to make, we must also have perspective. Yes, we are overwhelmed with all of this, but there is still life. There are many things that we need to show gratitude. In fact, I said to someone, a believer is either of two stations. Either he's showing patience, sabr, or he's showing gratitude. And I said, for the things that you and I, many of us are showing sabr for, the other people in other parts of the world will say, I'll die to be in your position of sabr.
Absolutely important. We've got about 4 minutes to go, and we need to obviously wind down. Apa Mariam, starting with you, about a minute, final thoughts?
Yes, so I think we all in it together, and as Brother Idris said, if we are a believer, we cannot not be despondent and never ever lose hope in the mercy of the Almighty. Where there's life, there's hope. Where there's hope, there's life. So yes, through all the challenges, there's still a lot to be thankful for. There's still a lot to be positive for, and I believe it's our attitude that will be the game changer. And positivity spreads positivity. Positivity breeds positivity. So please give off that positive aura, and remember what you say and how you say this has a profound impact on individuals. So please look at every situation, look at the glass that is half full and not half empty. Having said that, I know people are really, really struggling, and it's difficult. They find it difficult to remain positive. That's why a support system is vital. And please don't look at yourself, well, I don't have any skills and I don't have anything to offer. Yes, you have compassion, you have kindness. If you're able to volunteer, please do so. There's a great need out there. As Ruby has mentioned, people don't have food. Cook an extra pot of food, even if it's somebody, your local car garden, pack it, take it. That meal is luxury for them. So there's a lot we can do as individuals. And if you're feeling down, maybe just engage in a random act of kindness, because that will change your perspective. And that for me is the best therapy. So let's be positive. Even though it's difficult, let's try and be kind and compassionate, because for me, you know what, it's a boomerang. Kindness and compassion comes back to you as well.
Jazakallah for that. Ruby, final thoughts?
Yes, in closing, I think it's time for all of us to do some deep self-reflection and to understand our own place in what we're doing in this pandemic to keep ourselves safe, because in keeping ourselves safe, we're also keeping others safe. And that the mental health aspect is really, really important. It's not just the social and it's not just the economic, but there is a huge impact on us, and to find means of reaching out and I think we're still going to see a lot more of mental health issues coming up later on. So even as we go through it, to understand that we do need to look after ourselves.
Well, inshallah. And Idris, I know you would concur with me. Normally a lady has the final word, but I'll give you the opportunity tonight.
Anyway, Alhamdulillah, I've learned so much from our guests. And I think the critical thing in the end is for us to stay present, to be positive, to help others, to reconnect with our Creator, to reconnect with the Quran, to reconnect with the life of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And remember, we are gregarious social beings. It is so important for us to show generosity and empathy. If you can give someone hope, then that is the most beautiful gift you can give someone.
Well, Jazakallah to both of you as well. I see Apa Mariam is gone, but Idris, to you, Andrew, Ruby. It's been wonderful having you part of the panel with us here on Wednesday nights with myself. And Allah accept, Allah reward your efforts as well. And we do appreciate your time with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Nights with Inayat Wadi. And this was a much needed discussion, particularly at a time like this, these unprecedented, these very, very difficult times that we are living in. But at the end of the day, we need to keep each other inspired. We need to keep each other motivated. And more importantly, the empathy and the humanitarian spirit within us that needs to feature very, very strongly. So from myself and the rest of the team, once again, it's been an absolute pleasure being in your company. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.